What's up everybody, ProfessorPullz here. A couple months ago we began to see attention towards the Scarlet and Violet era sets really begin to pick up, causing many cards to jump up in price. Today, the hype continues for the Scarlet and Violet era cards, and many of these cards are continuing to trend upwards. With the Greninja SIR hitting nearly $250, the Magikarp Illustration Rare peaking at a little over $140, and many other illustration rares beginning to jump up in price, it can feel very overwhelming to keep track of all these market changes. Today we'll be going over 10 illustration rares that have been booming in price that you absolutely should be paying attention to. We'll be talking about illustration rares from newer sets, such as Temporal Forces and Twilight Masquerade, along with some earlier Scarlet and Violet era sets, such as Obsidian Flames and Paldea Evolved. Now before we get into the 10 illustration rares that have been jumping in price, I just want to say thank you to everybody who's shown support since I started this channel 3 weeks ago. It really means a lot, and I want to give back by doing our first channel giveaway by giving this PSA 8 Gengar Trainer Gallery from Lost Origin. All you have to do to enter the giveaway is subscribe to the channel, like this video, and comment down below what your favorite illustration rare is from the Scarlet and Violet era. If you're new to this channel, I just want to say thank you for being here, and to consider subscribing if you want to see more high quality Pokemon marketing, investing, and news videos just like this one. Now that we're here, I want to start off strong by talking about an illustration rare that's seen a lot of movement over the past couple days, and that is the Eevee illustration rare from Twilight Masquerade. For those who don't know, when this card was revealed in Crimson Haze, the Japanese version of the set a couple months ago, there was a lot of hype around it, and people knew that this was going to be a big chase card. Right at the start of Twilight Masquerade, this card started at around $25, which is the low you see here on the screen. Recently, it has jumped up to $66.74, and if you actually go on TCG Player, you really won't see listings below $75 to $80. I do think that there are some buyouts going on here that is causing the jump in price, but we knew from the get-go that this card was going to be a big chase for Twilight Masquerade. The Greninja Special Illustration Rare is amazing, and there are some awesome Trainer Special Illustration Rares, but as far as illustration rares go, we pretty much knew that the Eevee was going to be the big chase. Soon after release, we saw it jump up to around $40. I think recently it's been sitting around $45, but as of a couple days ago, it really started to jump up, hitting the $60, $70, and now $80 mark. The price reflected here on the TCG Player chart is still continuing to update as people purchase more of the card. The way that TCG market price works is they take the average of all the near mint copies that are purchased on their platform and use that to determine the market price. But if you look at the last sales, I have seen some cards selling for $80, $90, even $100 for this Eevee illustration rare. So I'd be curious to see what happens over the next couple months with this card. I do think that it's going to go back down to the $40, $50 mark. I think that there's some serious buyouts going on. Typically in Pokemon, when cards jump up this significantly in such a short period of time, it is due to buyouts and other factors. And usually when this happens, the card's market price isn't meant to be this high long term. Do I think that this card could be valuable in say 4 or 5 years? Of course, but I think it'll do so gradually and not jump all the way up to $80, $90 right away. The next card I want to go over is the Infernape illustration rare from Twilight Masquerade. This was a card that got me really excited about the set. I didn't care too much about the Ogre Pond special illustration rares, but this illustration right here is really what got me to buy Twilight Masquerade and even encouraged me to buy some Crimson Haze booster boxes before Twilight Masquerade even came out. Being someone who grew up on the Diamond and Pearl video games, this card really tugs at my heartstrings and really got me excited for this set. If you look at the recent market price, the card has doubled in price in the past couple weeks. The card was around a $5 card at its low, $5.15, and recently has jumped up to $9.34, nearly double its low. My personal take is that this card is going to level out and hold this price. I think so because the card already had seen around a $9 market price in the past, and it went down a lot, and now it's continuing to go back up. But the thing with illustration rares is that the pull rates have not changed over the Scarlet and Violet era, and this set is no exception. Twilight Masquerade only has 22 illustration rares, making some of these cards a little bit easier to pull than sets like Paradox Rift and Paldea Evolved, but only time will tell whether or not this card continues to rise, level out, or go down. Another really interesting jump in the past couple months is the Ninetales illustration rare from Obsidian Flames. I think people have always really enjoyed this card, but given the fact that there are only a few illustration rares in Obsidian Flames, less than any other set if you're not counting Paldean Fates, this card is pretty easy to pull compared to illustration rares from other sets like Paldea Evolved. I do think this card is a beautiful card. Ninetales has always been a very popular Pokemon, so I do think that this card was undervalued to begin with. I personally think that this card will fetch a fair price in the next 4 to 5 years, especially considering the artwork is so nice and the Pokemon is very popular. I think this is very similar to the Cleffa illustration rare from Obsidian Flames. I think both of those illustration rares have good odds over the next few years. But if you look at the market price, you'll see that its low in the past 6 months was $5.50, $10.58, and recently it hit a new high of $11.95, so it has actually doubled its value in the past 6 months. I think right now, since the pull rates are still pretty good on Obsidian Flames, there's no reason for it to be a $40 or $50 or $60 card like some other illustration rares. The Groudon illustration rare from Paradox Rift, for example, is very expensive, partially because of how hard it is to pull, since Paradox Rift has over 30 illustration rares. So looking at the card right now, I think it's currently valued where it should be at the moment. I think long term it will continue to go up, but right now it makes sense considering how many are available and how easy it is to pull in Obsidian Flames. Now I want to discuss a couple of the illustration rares from Temporal Forces, starting with the Gastly. We all know that the Gastly IR was very popular right from the get-go, but if you look at the market price, you'll see that it had a low of $16.44. This was pretty close to the low that it had right at release, but you'll see soon after it hit a high of around $35, exactly $34.60. Since then, it has actually dropped down a little bit. It is now sitting at $26.75. This reminds me a lot of the Tyranitar illustration rare from Paldea Evolved, which recently had some big gains and has since then started to level off a little bit. I do think that the card won't go back down to $16. I think it is a very, very nice illustration rare. Gengar, Haunter, and Gastly have always been very popular Pokemon, so I think this card will continue to fetch a premium long term, but even at its current price, it's still up over 50% from its low in the past 3 months. The other illustration rare from this set that I want to talk about is the Metagross, which we have seen more than double in price in the past 3 months. If we look at the chart, you'll see that its low was at $4.58, and it has recently jumped up to $10.61, and now it's just sitting down a little bit lower than that at $10.27. I think this card is really, really nice. The Metagross, like the Ninetales and the Gastly, are OG Pokemon. If you look across the Scarlet and Violet era sets, many of the Pokemon cards that tend to go up in price tend to be OG Pokemon that a lot of us grew up on. Looking long term, like 10 to 15 years, I do think that the Paldea Pokemon have a lot of potential to grow up in price, especially since many of us will look back nostalgically, especially kids who are growing up on the video games of Scarlet and Violet. So I wouldn't necessarily sleep on the Scarlet and Violet illustration rares, but we all know that right now in the current moment, many of these illustration rares of OG Pokemon are going to go for a good price. The Heracross illustration rare is another one similar to the Metagross that has recently really jumped in price. This card is from Paldea Evolved, making it a lot harder to pull, exponentially harder to pull than illustration rares in Temporal Forces and Twilight Masquerade. But if you look at the price chart here, you'll see that its low in the past 3 months is $7.45. It recently jumped up to $14.12, so nearly doubling its price, and is now sitting a little bit lower at around $13.66. If you do look at the chart, you'll see that it looks like it's starting to make a trend downward, so it might come down a little bit, but I don't think it's going to come back down to $7.45. I think it's going to make a very similar trend to the Gastly and the Tyranitar illustration rares. I think it's going to drop down a little bit, and I think it's going to find its new market price. I personally love this card. I love the contrast between the blues and the greens in this card. I talked about this card recently in the Paldea Evolved market price video, and I think long term this will continue to be one of my favorite illustration rares from Paldea Evolved, with this and the Sudowoodo. The next big jump that I want to talk about, that we've discussed a little bit in our Paldea Evolved video, is the Raichu illustration rare. This card is a little bit different than the Tyranitar that we recently discussed because the market price has not dropped down at all since it's jumped up. So if you look at its low in the past 3 months, now granted the card was worth less than this if you look 6 months or 12 months, but for the purpose of right now, we're going to talk about the last 3 months. The low was $21.77, and it recently jumped up to $43.43, where it is currently sitting and continuing to trend upward. I think this card will continue to rise in price. I think it is one of the big chases out of the Scarlet and Violet era as far as illustration rares go, and I don't really see it going back down to $20 unless we see a Paldea Evolved reprint. One of the big factors that really contributes to an illustration rare's price is its gem rate. What are the odds you're going to send it into PSA and hit a PSA 9 or a 10? And if you look at Paldea Evolved and Paradox Rift, you're going to see that the gem rates are really low for some of these illustration rares. That's why the Raichu illustration rare in a PSA 10 is nearly $300 or $400. Same with the Tyranitar. The Magikarp is $650 to $700. Many of these illustration rares are just fetching for a crazy price just because of how hard it is to hit a PSA 10. Paldea Evolved has many illustration rares of OG Pokemon, looking at Tyranitar, Magikarp, Raichu, Heracross, Sudowoodo. But where these cards are going to sit long term, we're just going to have to wait and see. Especially when a reprint comes, I think a lot of these cards are going to take a good hit right off the bat, and we'll see where they hit long term. Another really big jump that we've seen as far as illustration rares go is the Yveltal from Paradox Rift. This card is from the XY era. I personally did not play these video games, so I don't have as much of a nostalgic factor looking at this card, but I know a lot of people who really enjoyed these games, and if you look at the market price, it has nearly tripled in price in the last 3 months. So looking at its low, you'll see that it was a $5.80 card, and it recently hit a high of $17.09, and it is currently still on the rise. It's now one of the most expensive illustration rares in Paradox Rift, and it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere long term. Again, if we get a reprint of Paradox Rift, we might see some of these prices dip, but right now it's looking strong, and it is currently 3 times more expensive than it was 3 months ago. The second to last illustration rare I want to go over is the Riolu, which is the only card on this list that is from Scarlet and Violet base set. If you look at its low, it was a $5 card in the last 3 months, and has recently doubled in price to $10.13. I've always really loved this card, one of my favorite illustration rares, but I think a lot of people just weren't really enjoying it at the time. Scarlet and Violet base set really just doesn't get the attention that it probably deserves. It has the Miraidon special illustration rare, the Koraidon, and the Gardevoir special illustration rare, along with the Ralts, Kirlia, and Slowpoke illustration rares. But given Lucario is a very, very popular Pokemon, it makes sense now that the Riolu illustration rare would start to jump up in price, especially since the artwork is just so cool. So I would keep a close eye on this one, especially if you look at the chart. You can see that the card does not continue to be slowing down anytime soon. And the last card on this list is the Tyranitar illustration rare from Paldea Evolved. The reason I put it on here is because I think it is still important to see how much it has jumped up in the past few months, and also it serves as a good comparison to the Raichu illustration rare, which has not seen a dip at all. This card is very similar to the Gastly, where it took a big jump and a little dip, but it's still worth more than it was in the last few months. I think this card has a lot of potential long term. Tyranitar is a very popular Pokemon, and it has always had very expensive cards in some of the more vintage eras. So I'll personally be keeping an eye on this card. If it makes any big changes, you'll be the first to know. That's going to be it, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you learned something new today. Don't forget to enter the giveaway by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and commenting down below what your favorite illustration rare is from the Scarlet and Violet era. Keep an eye out for my next few videos where I'll announce the giveaway winner and also enter that giveaway winner into the description of the video. Alright everybody, I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you on the next one.